I'm Michelle Graves, your host on today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm glad to have you here. Now, at The Power of Money, we are interested in three things happening. First, we want you to get the necessary education so that you and your family can make the decisions that will impact positively on you in your financial life. The second thing is that you be empowered to prosper. I only want the best for you. And you can only get that if you have education and then the drive to make it happen. And the third thing that is so important to me is that you recognize that life is more than a journey and that you be energized so that you can begin to participate in the truly joyous experience of living. So here's to empowerment, here's to education, and here's to energy. I'm Michelle Graves, your host, Power of Money, and here we go. And here we go. It's so good to be here today. And I thank you for allowing me the privilege of coming into your homes, as I have for close to 30 years now, on the subject matter of money, finance, empowerment, whatever. It's been an awesome journey, and as I dance through my senior years now, it's incredible. Today's show is no exception. I am honored and privileged to have as my guest for the next hour Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who is one of the preeminent economists in the United States, having achieved stellar things. I've known her since we were teenagers. She was awesome then, and no less today. She is a PhD from MIT. Exactly. A black woman did graduate with her PhD in economics from MIT. She is a former president of Bennett College, a college for African American women, and she is knee-deep in policy, economic policy under the current administration as well as previous administrations. She's viewed as opinionated, straightforward, and if you want the facts, you go to Dr. Malveaux. I'm going to be focusing on this show to cover her soon-to-be published book on Black money. And before you get into what does that look like, what does that mean, I'm going to let her answer those questions. I'm not going to do it. I am an economist. But my background and expertise is private sector, as all of you all know. I'm boots on the ground. But she brings such a dimension and a perspective that I had to have her on my show. So it's a blessing to you. Sit down, pen in hand, pass this video to all of your associates and peers. It will be on YouTube. For those of you all that are in my markets, you can just tune in and watch it on television. So without further ado, good morning, Dr. Malveaux.
Good morning, Michelle. Good morning. Good morning. It's good to be with you this morning.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Where do we want to begin? How do we want to frame this with this book?
You know, let's talk about where we are as a people, because I think it's really important to talk about the wealth gap, the income gap, the unemployment gap, and why those are not the place. We start with those just to get a temperature check.
Okay.
So we know that with the temperature check, for every dollar a black person has in wealth, a white person has $14, $13 or $14. So we basically, there's a huge wealth gap, and this wealth gap has been persistent since the early 20th century. I mean, it gets
that
a little
long. That long?
Let me tell you, in 1880, the wealth gap was for every dollar a black person had, a white person had $36. By 1910, that number had dropped to, for a dollar, every dollar a black person had, a white person had about $15. Now we're down to 13. Well, sometimes we go down to 10. You know, sometimes it's 1 to 10. But we took a big hit after the Great Recession. And so if nothing else happened, it would take 200 and some years to close the wealth gap. If nothing else happened, if there were no reparations, no exogenous infusions of money into our community, if we just went like we're going, there will always be a wealth gap. The income gap, similarly, African Americans earn about 60% of what whites earn. Now, that goes up and down, but not very, it's never been 70%. Now,
Okay.
within certain occupations, you see a narrowing gap. With more education, you sometimes see a narrowing gap, but that income gap is there. So you've got wealth gap, income gap, and how most black people get their income through work. And then we have an unemployment rate gap that's about 2 to 1. And again, sometimes it'll go down to as low as 1.7. It's never been as low as 1.5. Sometimes it goes up to as high as 2.1, but we basically see that gap. So these gaps are there. So this is the dilemma that we always face as economists looking at this. And I've been trying to put this book together and just kind of feeling dragged down about it from the perspective of it's the same old song. And I was talking to some young people and like, well, has it always been this bad? And so that really helped me think about the title of this book, which is Black Money Then, Now, and in the Future.
Yes.
Then, we once had over 100 black-owned banks. Now we have 22.
Whoa.
Okay? So even with as little as we had because of enslavement, Afro-descendant people were able to accumulate, to come together, to do things, despite the fact there have been all kinds of disincentives for us. For example, the United States government started the Freedmen's Bank. And as you know, the Freedmen's Bank went out of business.
Yes.
Lots of black people believe that black people mismanaged the Freedmen's Bank because toward the end of its life, Frederick Douglass came in to try to save it. But the fact is that you had all these wealthy white people on the board of that bank who took loans out and gave the loans to their own friends and whatever. And
oh
that's
my gosh. Are you?
That's how it failed. It didn't fail because of black people's mismanagement. It failed because of white people's chicanery. But there are those who still believe to this day that the Freedmen's Bank was a failure because black people mismanaged it. In
oh
fact,
my goodness.
Enslaved people bringing their pennies, Michelle, their pennies. Yeah, and you know how hard it was for people to accumulate then, and that bank failed. So Doyle Mitchell, who's a dear friend and the president of Industrial Bank here in Washington, D.C., one of the remaining banks, and his family, that bank is still in his family. He's the president and CEO. The bank was founded by his uncle, and in any case, or his great uncle, I believe. But in any case, Doyle, when I said to him, Doyle, why do black banks fail? He says bad loans. He says bottom line, bad loans. So we can talk about chicanery and all that, but bad loans and who gave the loans? Because one of the first chapter of the book really talks about black banking, and then we're going to talk about black business, looking at Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're going to look at land loss. And remember the Emergency Land Fund?
Yes.
We were at the Black Economic Research Center, and the Emergency Land Fund was housed in the same place. We've lost so much of our land, but all of this has been about we had and then we lost.
Well, may I interject? Because this is a very, very important issue for me, and certainly I respect the time that we spent together at the Black Economic Research Center, that think tank in New York, with all those phenomenal people that we had a chance to learn from and groom from. But as a banker myself, I totally agree that banks fail because of bad loans. And it doesn't have anything to do with color. If you book a loan and it does not pay out, then you are going to experience a loss of capital as well as other things. You do enough of them and you're out the board. How does that happen? I mean, with the bank that went under, that Frederick Douglass got involved, that could not have been turned around when you got bad loans on the books.
No,
you can't turn that around.
But Frederick Douglass was such a good man.
Yes, he was.
And so white people played him. They believed that if he came in, it would restore faith, but he couldn't create money where money was not there.
No.
And the challenge. You can't make, what do they say? You can't make chicken salad out of chicken, you know what? So if the money wasn't there, the money wasn't there. The challenge for black-owned banks, though, is the pull between being a bank and being a business, which, Michelle, as you know, as a banker, being a bank, banking is a business. But a black-owned bank is often pressured to have community involvement. And the community involvement often is around, you need to lend to this church, you need to lend to this community center. Well, if it's a good loan, the church or the community center, it might not get a loan from a Wells Fargo or Bank of America, might get the loan from an industrial, or a one bank, but industrial and One United Bank still have to have loan criteria.
They definitely do.
They just cannot give you the money because you're Black. Now, Penny Savings Bank, which became Continental Bank, Consolidated Bank, I'm sorry, Penny Savings Bank, this was Maggie Lena Walker's bank. And Maggie Lena Walker was the first Black woman to charter a bank, the second woman to charter a bank in the United States. She started the bank, and then when she was so brilliant, Michelle, when she saw the Depression coming, she went to the other two surviving Black banks in Richmond, Virginia, and said, look, guys, we need to come together. We need to come together. We need to put our three banks together and call it Consolidated. And she stayed in charge of that bank until she died in 1934. She was succeeded by her right-hand guy. His name was Emmett Burke. But that bank went out of business in 2005. So
Why?
that bank, bad loans. Bad loans. The people in charge chose to lend to some of their colleagues. They exceeded the federal limits on lending. And basically, eventually, because of that, failed. They were able to, at Adams Bank, actually, if you remember Adams Bank, the woman-owned bank, first bought them, but then Adams Bank got in trouble for some of the same reasons, and eventually, so there's no more Consolidated bank in Richmond. There is a statue of Maggie Lena in Richmond, which is so exciting, but the real challenge when you look at it is, you really want to talk about this 100 and some year history just swallowed again because of chicanery, but not just chicanery. You also have the issue of changing federal regulations. We lost many Black-owned banks during the savings and loan crisis in 1989 because after we saw majority banks create all kind of chaos, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and others came in and said, we have to tighten up these rules. When they tightened up the rules, Black banks ended up failing. So, and then, the white man's ice is colder, and that's really unfortunate. But when you look at the 22 remaining Black-owned banks that exist today, and you add up their deposits add up to about $5 billion.
Okay.
Well, African-American people have a annual income of roughly $1.3 trillion.
Yeah.
So 5 billion, 1.3 trillion. If only 10% of our dollars went into Black-owned banks, we'd have a much stronger Black bank sector. But
and I would also say that it is impossible, and I wanted to get your opinion about this since you are talking about banking, and I tell folks nothing happens without banks. Nothing happens. The government cannot step in and do what a bank is chartered to do, which is to lend money within the community that it serves. Now, I'm not talking about a bank being a social welfare agenda. I'm talking about there are businesses that do need money properly capitalized to grow and to expand, particularly in a global market. And given our history of having all this insider stuff, which incidentally, Julianne, and excuse me, viewers, I'm interviewing Dr. Julianne Malveaux, a preeminent economist, on her new book coming called Black Money. But getting back to what I am asking you, given the history, forget that, that's done. Where are we today? Because are Black people interested in helping minority-owned companies through this venue?
This is the issue. If we deposit, the only way, Black banks need two things. They need depositors and they need investors.
Yes.
Because the banks have to show an ROI. And basically, investors need to come in. We haven't seen investors come in, and we've seen a consolidation in banking where you have so many fewer small banks these days.
Correct.
Many investors come in, they invest in a small bank with the view toward this bank is going to be acquired by a big bank at some point in time. bankers like Doyle Mitchell at Industrial Bank, he doesn't want to be acquired.
I think
He
that's honorable.
This is a family legacy going back to 1934. They want to maintain the bank. It's a community bank. They've done all kinds of really interesting things to uplift the community, including a day they did a year ago called Mortgage Day, where they basically help people qualify for mortgages. And this is, initially the reason why we had black owned banks in the first place is because if you go back to the turn of the century, white banks would not take our money. When they took our money, they wouldn't lend it to us. So you might have an account, but you couldn't borrow, and they wouldn't hire us. So the black banking industry is about deposits, it's about loans, and it's about employment. And it's a very honorable industry, but obviously what we've seen is basically people saying, why should I bank with X when I can go to one of the big banks? Well, the answer is because the big bank won't give you money. I'll tell you my personal banking story with my home in Washington, D.C. When I purchased it in 1997. That was back in the 20% down days, and I was struggling to get the money together. And I had a gap, and the gap wasn't huge, but I had a gap, and you can't create money. And so I thought I was going to not get the house. I was very in despair. But Emma Chappelle, who started the Bank of in Philadelphia, and you remember Emma, she was the treasurer for Reverend Jesse Jackson's 1984 campaign, but she started the United Bank of Philadelphia. And I was bemoaning my situation to her, and she said, well, why didn't you call me, girl? I'll take your loan.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, well, I only really need, X thousand. It was like $5,000. I said, she said, no, I'll take the whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
Said, send me your paperwork. Again, this was back in the days of the fax machine. We didn't, and faxed her the paperwork, and she, within a week, we had a loan approval. And
awesome.
That's what black-owned banks do.
Yes.
In the first 10 years of Maggie Lena Walker's bank, St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank, over 600 black people in Richmond, Virginia were able to buy homes because she wrote their mortgages. And you have the thing of, we always talk about the thin file and the thick file, where bankers in some cases, like if they know you or have worked with you, will bend over backwards. Mm-hmm. And the thin file is where you know what the thin file is. You're a banker.
Yep.
You fill out a piece of paper, you look at the piece of paper, you say, oh no, you don't qualify. You don't spend any time or energy saying, well, if you put so much more dollars in your account, or if you did this, or if you did this, you could qualify.
Right.
You say, oh, you don't qualify. And so in any case, our black-owned banks are very important, but we've had lots of institutions in our community, Michelle, that are very important that we haven't always valued. One of them, which will be in one of the later chapters of the book, looking at the future, is our HBCUs. As you know, I didn't go to an HBCU. If I did, I probably would be a much nicer person, because white people taught me how to fight for everything that I was going to get.
Julianne, they taught me how to fight. I'm serious.
Although I was probably pugilistic to start with, but they really. But I do recall. I recall an instance which will be way off subject. When I was an undergraduate, where I was accused of cheating on an English paper, and I was first published when I was 14 years old.
Yes.
For someone to accuse me of cheating on an English paper was ridiculous, and it was just so totally ridiculous. And I fought like hell. The little teacher had given me a failing grade, and I wasn't taking it. And by the end of the story was that the woman who was ABD was fired, or her contract was not renewed.
Yes.
But basically, we fought that way. We fought that one like crazy. But our HBCUs are institutions, again, that we really don't value. I said I didn't go to one, but I ran one for 5 years. It was one of the great experiences of my life to be the president of Bennett College for Women in Greensboro, North Carolina. But it pains me that so many of our HBCUs are having challenges because, first of all, people believe that the white man's ice is colder. So they don't necessarily want their children to go to HBCUs, even as they're having experiences like the young lady had at Yale, where simply sleeping in a lounge got her police attention. And we have instances like this again and again and again with our young people. So our HBCUs should be valued, but we need, again, what do we need? We need enrollment and we need investment. We need high profile or high net worth individuals to give to HBCUs. You want your name on a building, you want to have a legacy, please give to HBCU. So we have a lot in our community that we haven't lifted up. And much of what I do in Black Money, and the book will be out sometime next year, it's still in process, but I'm very excited about it, as I think you can tell.
Yes.
But what we want to do is look at what I call Afrofuturism. What is the future possibly? And one of the questions I ask is, what could we do with $1.3 trillion if we were truly community minded? There was just an incident that happened in Brooklyn, New York, where a woman was going to get her eyebrows done, and she didn't like them, so she didn't want to pay. And the people who owned the nail salon beat her with a broomstick.
I read that.
Beat her.
I'm like,
online.
really?
There's a young sister who's saying that Black women need to figure out how to patronize our own in the nail industry. There are so many fewer Black-owned nail shops than there are those that are owned by our Asian American brothers and sisters. But we need to start seeking those out and supporting our own. What would we have? I mean, how much money would we have? How many more businesses would we have if we're able to support each other?
Can I offer a thought? And that's just from my perspective. I started the first female-owned mortgage bank in Ohio. I started it because the majority banks were not lending to veterans. They weren't lending to single women, white or Black. If you were single, divorced, you weren't getting a loan. And they were not lending to our seniors. So those were three demographics that my bank addressed, which is I was awarded a letter of commendation from President Clinton because of our work with veterans, awarded another commendation from Fannie Mae for the active lending to single women and women with children, which was very dear to me, and for seniors. And so I feel that real, because it did. When I drive by neighborhoods and see homes that our company made, it makes me feel good, particularly because so many of them were at that time African Americans, and they needed a place to live as opposed to rent. That is a vital community give back. And for the record, Julianne, because it was so new, I had to co-sign on a lot of those loans. People in Cincinnati do not know my name had to go on that loan for 2 years. They had to pay as agreed for 2 years, or else it would be a charge back to my corporation. And I'm telling you, none of my borrowers defaulted. None of them paid late. I would visit people that I could sense, and I tell them, you're going to have to do hot dogs. You're going to have to do hot dogs, so you got to do this mortgage. And I'm saying that it can be done, it has been done, and that we have to move forward to stand true to these institutions and to back them. Now, I'd like for you, just as a continue on this subject, you do know that insurance is a foundation for a tremendous amount of wealth. And because Caucasians were able to buy large insurance policies, and upon their demise, death, it passed on to their heirs. Our people were not allowed to buy insurance policies, in most cases over $5,000. Can you speak to that?
The insurance industry is one that I've not spent a lot of time looking into, but there certainly has been as much discrimination, if not more, in that industry as in any other. And again, as you say, insurance has been the basis of wealth, but inherited wealth.
Yes.
Inherited wealth, not just insurance, the whole notion of inheritance. See, there was a point in time, we as economists always study, factors of production and, returns to factors of production. Well, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability are the factors of production. But we were somebody else's factor of production. In other words, able to collect our wages. We were somebody else's source of wealth. Indeed, the enslavement industry is the basis of both the banking industry,
yes,
and the the banking industry and lending, people use their property, enslaved people, as collateral for loans. So the entirety of the building of the South really is on the back of black people.
You know
So
what? You just said something. You said something I never even thought about. That we were collateral for the
precisely.
loan because we were an asset. Oh,
That that's why we had so much breakup of families, because when people died and they had loans, the people who came in, and again, you read these stories in the slave narratives, that the Works Progress Administration, they got all these narratives about how families were split up. But what would happen? Massa might have been a good massa as far as that goes, and felt that families should be kept together. Massa dies. Massa owes the bank how many dollars? How does it
mm,
get the money? They sell the enslaved people. And it doesn't matter that Massa promised you that he would never sell you away from your husband, or that the children would not be sold away. Massa owed. And so Massa had to pay. Our families were disrupted because, again, of what I call just dissolute white people. If you look at some of the stories of, it's fascinating. We're a bit off topic, but it is fascinating. Elizabeth Keckley, the woman who was Mary Todd Lincoln's basically seamstress and friend at a point in time, was an enslaved woman. She was owned by a Virginia family, and they called that these people were so dissipated at a point in time that they had to leave Virginia and go live with their family, I believe, in Missouri. And she, a seamstress, supported her masters with her sewing ability.
mm.
With her, as she wrote it, I supported 17 people with my needle. So she was one of the go-to seamstresses in, I believe it's St. Louis. I may have the city wrong, but in Missouri, she was the go-to seamstress. She purchased herself.
Well,
Her master even said to her, "You're going to run away one day," and she told him, which I find cray cray, but she said, "I'm a woman of honor. I will buy my freedom." So she purchased herself and her son. Her son ended up going to fight in the Civil War and was killed, and that was her bond with Mary Todd Lincoln, is that she had also lost a child. But the Elizabeth Keckley story is fascinating because you had three kinds of enslaved people. You had the ones who basically ran away. That would be us, Michelle.
yes, that
You
would be us.
have the people who stayed.
Yes.
Often women stayed because of their children and family ties.
Hmm.
And then you have the people, and it was a small percentage, but in your city of Cincinnati, at a point in time, about a quarter of the black people were self emancipated, as in they purchased themselves.
Mm.
They
My
so they
goodness.
and whenever I say I purchased myself, something happens to my stomach, because it's so counterintuitive to think of buying yourself. I mean, there's so many things. How do you trust Massa? You,
How is that enforceable? How do
you
you
know,
how does that happen? And I know we're off topic here, but how do you get recognition of your contract freeing yourself? Who
well,
honors that?
what- it's interesting. So Free Frank McWhorter, in my book Surviving and Thriving: 365 Facts on Black Economic History, I start out with Free Frank, and Free Frank McWhorter was he was a craftsman. So he cut a deal with his
Yep.
master. He's going to pay him. Many very skilled enslaved people were able to make money on Sundays. If they didn't go to church, they go and do odd jobs, or not odd jobs. If they were skilled craftspeople, they might do woodwork or something for whites who didn't have slaves. So Free Frank cut a deal with his master that he would pay him so many dollars per week out of what he earned on the side for his freedom. But then Free Frank met somebody, and they married, jumped the broom, and Sister Friend became pregnant. And so he now had to not only finish purchasing himself, but also his wife and his child. Before it was over with, I think he ended up purchasing 14 of his relatives.
Oh.
Uh, but one of the
Mm.
challenges that Free Frank may have had, and the history is a little light on it, is that did Master Hold keep to the deal?
Yeah.
Because what do? You can't. You weren't even considered a person. So could you sue in a court of law?
This is why, not to interject, but I was like, wait a minute, how does one get into the arena of contract enforcement when you are 3/4 of a human being? How does that work?
That was, enslavement, the whole of it. And I purposely don't deal with it in this particular book in Black Money.
Good.
I really want to, because it's a whole other, it's a conundrum. And many people have written about it. But when you look at some of the things that people deal, some of the deals that people cut that are so counterintuitive, some of the white people who were very helpful and others who were not, there's, I'm trying to think of the man's name, and he was in Cincinnati also. And it's just not coming to me right now. But this brother, this was what you call a bad mammer.
It's 10 o'clock.
Really amazing man. And the thing about him is that he actually, after trying to run away for 3 or 4 times, being lashed and everything, cut a deal with a white woman. He said to her, "You buy me, and then I'll buy myself back from you." So how do that's just the brain machinations of that. You buy me, and I'll buy myself back. She could have decided at any time, I'm not going to stick with the deal.
The people do it all the time.
Well, that's one of the things, in terms of land accumulation, other things.
Yes.
Just to go back to banking, the first, not the first, but one of the black banks in Virginia that started before St. Luke's Penny Savings Bank, Maggie Leader Walker's bank, was called the True Reformers Bank. Many of these banks started out of fraternal organizations, fraternal/self-help organizations.
Yes.
True Reformers got started because they were accumulating money. They needed to put it in a safe place. A white man offered the use of his safe for them. But then when he saw how much money they were accumulating, he became alarmed and shared with the people in town, these black people have too much money.
Oh.
So they decided they needed to have their own bank because they really did not need this white man keeping tabs on them. Economic envy is the root of many of the obstacles that African Americans have faced. Many people would tell you that Ida B. Wells, that lynching was about black men lusting after white women. But the first lynching that Ida B. Wells covered was actually a lynching that had its roots in economic envy. In Memphis, Tennessee, a brother and 2 of his friends started a cooperative grocery store in the black community because the white stores were charging very high prices and were very exploitive. So he started a grocery store in the hood that was not too far from, and may have been across the street from, a white grocery store. So the black people went to the black grocery store. The white man got mad. Something ensued. 2 little boys were having a challenge playing marble, a white boy and a black kid. And the black kid won, and the white kid whined to his dad. His dad was looking for an excuse to start some mess. Mm-hmm. So he went over to the black people's store and started some mess. And the black people, he went with a gun. They had their guns, so they shot him. They didn't kill him. They shot him. They were arrested and put in jail. But the white people could not stand to have a trial, so they pulled those brothers out of the jail and lynched them.
Oh, my goodness.
And Ida B. Wells was the godmother to one of their children. And so she wrote about that lynching. That was the first lynching she wrote about, and that set her on her lynching crusade. There was no white woman involved. There was no allegation of a white woman involved. It was pure economic envy.
But as a sidebar, you do know about the story here in Cincinnati, which is a true and valid story because there was a growing entrepreneurial initiative in Cincinnati. And there was economic envy and what is now known as Serpentine Wall here. I think it's interesting, Serpentine Wall was the site of literally a massive riot, and black people here fled to Canada. They didn't even stay in the United States. They kept, they was like, not here. Huh?
When did that happen?
I'm not sure, but it is chronicled here in this city. It's one of those little factoids nobody really wants to talk about, why the entrepreneurial spirit was crushed in Cincinnati, Ohio so finally, which is you do better to get education, don't do business, because you know what business will get you. But
Tulsa, Oklahoma, same thing. I mean, again, the Tulsa, the root of the Tulsa story theoretically is that a black man, Dick Rowland, what happened was this was back in the day when you had elevator operators. The operator was a young white woman. Dick Rowland apparently, when the elevator stopped abruptly, jostled her.
Okay.
He didn't hit her. He just his body touched her body. And that became, by the time the grapevine got it, he had theoretically raped her.
Oh.
And so the white people threatened to lynch him. The black people, many of whom were veterans of World War I, were like, oh no, it's not going down like that. And essentially, white people came into the black community of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and basically savaged it. They on the guise that they thought that black people were arming themselves or were going to do something to them. On that guy, all they said was, "Y'all not gonna basically lynch this man." They tore that place up, and it was a place where you had everything. You had everything but a bank, but you had a department stores. You had physicians. John Hope Franklin's dad was an attorney there. You had all this black intellect, black wealth, home ownership, and the white folks just came and tore it up.
Now just let me pause for a minute. Don't change the camera. We're talking about Black Wall Street, correct? And what happened out there, where people, a thriving, vibrant, totally segregated community was decimated over what I feel was economic envy.
Economic envy, nothing but. There's a black woman who's still alive, the only survivor of Tulsa. Her name is Dr. Olivia Hooker. She's 103, and she was 6 when this happened, and she says she remembers asking her mother, "Why is my government turning guns on me?" So the government actually sent soldiers in to contain the black community. Her father owned a department store, and the only reason some of the black people were able to survive economically is that they had kept their money in his department store in his vault.
Oh.
Because they basically, people would go to the bank, the white-owned bank, about once a week. But other than that, when they had money, they would store it in the vault. So I'm overdue to visit Dr. Hooker. I really want to. I've interviewed her several times, and I have her story, but I really want to get her on camera to really just talk to her. And she's 103, just an amazing lady. But we have these. When you saw black wealth, you saw white envy, and that again is one of the reasons why. We have to look at our history. A lot of our young people don't know this history, and if not knowing this history, you often end up in a quagmire. But I have to say this: Killer Mike, the rapper, in the wake of some of the police executions of our young people, said, "Take your money out of those banks and take them to our banks." And hashtag Bank Black.
Okay, I've seen that. Mm-hmm.
And in the week after, I think Doyle Mitchell said in the 6 months after that, hashtag Bank Black, almost 60 million black dollars went to black banks.
How much did you say?
Almost $60 million.
60 million?
60 million.
Oh, wee. Now that you just got my attention.
That's impactful.
That's impactful.
People closed accounts, or they just opened new accounts in black banks. He moved his money to the black bank in Atlanta. One United has done a whole thing with that. I mean, if you're on Facebook or they advertise. They are, and that's one of the things that Doyle Mitchell talked about, and many others have talked about, is how, all of our black institutions have to get with the 21st century in terms of technology and everything else. So, One United Bank, as an example, they call themselves the first online black bank because they encourage online banking. Now, the other banks also do online banking, but you can open your account up online, and they have almost 30,000 ATMs all over the country that you can use with no fee. Now, usually, if you're out of bank and you
Right.
you've got to pay, the 1% or whatever it is. It's not more than 1%. It's like 2%.
Yeah.
But in any case, you can withdraw from from affiliated ATMs, and there are 30,000 of them around the country, almost 30,000 of them around the country. So they've seen a big surge, but they advertise. I see their ads on Facebook. I see them on Twitter sometimes. I mean, they advertise, and basically, just so fast forwarding, what could we have when you have someone like a Killer Mike, a rapper, saying, take your money out of these majority banks, put them in a black bank so we can build a black community. One of the things, Michelle, that's been fascinating, I told you we had some time together earlier this week or last week, and told you that the Library of Congress has become, my new favorite hangout. Because,
Not surprising.
but there's just so much history.
Yes.
One of the things that I've learned as reading, there was a guy who was, they had an executive assistant for Negro Affairs at the Department of Commerce, and from 1940 on to about 1960. And the guy's name is in my book, but I forget it all the time. It was one of those three. But anyway, long story short, reading some of his correspondence and looking at, he gathered data about black banks, and he also basically was the go-to person on black organizations, trying to bring financial issues to black organizations, help people start businesses, all of that. But one of the things in looking through some of the stuff in the Library of Congress and looking at his correspondence, it's like we keep reinventing the wheel, and we have the same challenges that we've had in the past in terms of working in concert, working in community, in terms of just simple communications, and the issue of how we communicate about what's available with each other.
Right.
Cooperation. I mean, one of the things that's exciting to me right now is that the AME Church, through the Black Chamber of Commerce and Ron Busby, the AME Church has agreed to a partnership with the black banking community.
Oh my goodness.
So that
Now that's powerful. That's powerful.
This was announced maybe a month or two ago.
Okay.
More of the AME churches have pledged to move their accounts into black-owned banks and to work with black-owned banks on increasing the number of African-American homeowners. Because black homeowners took a huge hit, the Great Recession. Moving now, we have one of the lowest levels of black home ownership since like 1980. We've got like 2%. At a point, it was like 46, 47%. It was almost hitting on 50. The comparable number for whites, of course, is somewhere over 70%. So we're still not at 50%. One of the things that also is alarming in doing some of this research is that while the African American community flounders, and I'm not comparing this, we're not going to have a pity party, but the Latino community now has more wealth than we do.
But Dr. Malveaux, the Latino community works as a community. I mean, I've made loans to date. They work as a community.
There you have it, and making some of the compromises and sacrifices that our community doesn't make. I mean, I was walking back from the gym this morning and ran into a lady. I see her a lot in the morning, and her two daughters, and they have a cleaning business.
Yes.
And that's what they do. They clean homes, and they also live together.
Yes.
So it's 3 families because the daughters are mature. They're in their 30s. So they're accumulating.
They are accumulating.
And, they're making sacrifices to accumulate. And I'm not saying that black people don't do that, because we do. But we could do more and better. If we want to talk about where we are economically, and we had a production possibility curve, and we know, those, you can draw one for your folks. But anyway, we're inside our production possibility curve. In other words, we don't have our fair share. We're not doing the most with what we have.
Well, one of the exciting things, I was at a church Sunday, and Reverend Damon Lynch, who is viewed as very progressive in Cincinnati has a very large congregation. Large, came from the inner city, and now they bought a huge Jewish facility in a community that's on the downhill. And he has been on cutting edge in terms of his vision. I'm going to have him on end of the month if I can get him. But he talked about Sunday, about why we have to return. And this was shocking to me, but he said we're going to have to return to segregation, because at least when we were segregated, we attended to the things that would empower our community and the businesses and all the things. He said, but go to a church. White people are not sitting in your church on Sundays. And he said the same thing in terms of economic distribution. Our people are the consumers and bring very little outside of our power of consumption. So he shared his vision, powerful vision for taking back our communities, for moving ahead and setting up infrastructure to get that done. And for the record, a group that he put together is getting ready to rebuy a shopping center and put businesses in there, and they're going to be doing some other things. So I left out of there.
I would disagree. I'm excited about his vision for shopping centers. I'm excited about the fact that they bought a synagogue. I think that's really great. I think we have to do self-help, self-investment, but I'm not prepared to say we need to go back to segregation. I'm really not. I've heard that a lot. My dear friend Bev Smith.
Yeah.
To talk about back in the day when we kept our dollar in our communities, and I think that that's really important. I just really don't think that talking segregation is productive.
I agree.
I think that we want to talk about community cooperation and community development. I'd like to see us own more. One of the things that Doyle Mitchell said to me that I found really important, and I did a talk on my first chapter last week. And one of the things he said, white people can bank in black-owned banks if they want to.
Yep.
You have all these white people walking around talking about how woke they are. Well, take your woke dollars and invest them in a black-owned bank. Support our community.
I think that's very workable. Like right now.
So the whole notion of segregation, I chafe at that.
Okay.
But I do understand the argument, and I understand where people are coming from. I would just say, as opposed to segregation, let's look at how we can support each other.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean segregation, but what it does mean is Maggie Anderson. I know you know who she is. A sister she wrote a book called A Year of Buying Black. She decided that for a whole year they would go out of their way to buy black. And they did some amazing things. And she pointed out some of the challenges and the issues we have in our community in terms of providing service, in terms of what we can do and what we can't do, and what we have and what we don't have. But she deliberately went out of her way to ensure, down to groceries, down to underwear, that they were buying. So I would just say to people, that may be extreme for some people, but think about every dollar you spend. How many of those, out of your dollar, how many pennies go to black-owned businesses?
I think that's where that conversation has to begin. I hate to say we're repeating history, but I want to shift because our hour is almost up, and I want to talk to you about what your thoughts are for moving forward. And I also want you to give your phone number or how people can reach out to you with regard to you sharing your information, speaking, those kinds of things. So can you share with me in the remaining time what your thoughts are about what the African American community needs to do to move forward? And make sure you give me your phone number and email for people to reach out to you.
Okay, well, two things. Consolidating our economic power is what we need to do to move forward. If we want more, we must invest more and spend more in our own community. We must know now, if we look at the labor market, Michelle, the economy is not generating the kind of jobs that we
Not.
like to see on a regular basis. That man in the White House continues to say, oh, black unemployment rates are so low. But the reason why the black unemployment rate is lower than we've seen it before, and it's not so low, but the reason why it's where it is because some black people are leaving the labor market because they can't employment. And in fact, much of the working class white angst that we're experiencing, and that shows up in terms of some of the Nazi racism, people saying they're taking our country, they're taking our jobs, is really about working class whites also looking at the labor market and saying, where's the space for me? So the importance of black businesses, just like black banking, the importance of black businesses is that we can hire ourselves and hire our own. We can train our own. This is going to be very important as we move ahead because so-called good jobs are disappearing. We can see a lot more automation. We see a lot more technology. I just saw a company that, Michelle, is actually renting robots. So they develop these drones and robots, and they rent them to corporations for manufacturing. And
Wow.
the robots are being paid like $10, $12, $15 an hour. Something that they want to pay people. But now robots don't get sick. Robots don't want sick leave.
Nope. Maternity leave.
Discrimination complaints.
Nope.
Etc. So our businesses are very important. Education is one of the most important things we can do. Our young people also need to be taught to think globally. By that I mean languages as well as global travel. One of my proudest accomplishments at Bennett was to create a global studies minor, and the number of young people who traveled internationally went up by 800%.
Wow.
Leadership.
Wow.
We actually encourage people to come to college with a passport. So come with a passport. And we're able to get a grant from the United Methodist Church to pay for passports for about 100 young women.
That is powerful. That is powerful. Can you not to interrupt, but my producer just signaled me. I need you to tell people how they can find you or reach you.
Okay, I know you have a Chiron up with my name on it, spelled properly. So
Yeah.
folks, JulianneMalveaux.com, just my name.com, will take you to my website if you want me as a speaker, because speaking is one of my favorite things to do. I love it.
And you do a great job. You do a great job.
Well, I'm at JulianneMalveaux.com. There's a tab that says booking. So if you're interested in having me as a speaker, go on to the booking. If you want to reach me directly, same, JulianneMalveaux.com. My direct email address is dr.j@JulianneMalveaux.com. So that's how you find me.
Okay, I think that is extremely important. I'm going to encourage everyone that sees this video. We'll be playing it here starting Monday, but it will be on YouTube probably before week's end. And for those of you that have the opportunity, please reach out to her and have her to speak at your church or at your community or in your whatever venue you work in. It's important to hear this story and to hear this message from this woman who has literally sacrificed her life and her academic studies. She could be in anywhere in the world talking about economics and labor economics and that type of thing. But this is what she has chosen to do, and we are incredibly blessed to have that going on. I mean that, because very few people are aware of the personal sacrifice that our leaders make to do these things. And certainly your contribution is without doubt right at the top of the list. So I just want to summarize, just for the purpose of our viewers. Dr. Malveaux is getting ready to publish a book called Black Money. It's going to be a bestseller, I can assure you that. Where she I'm just telling you, it is going to be a bestseller. Okay, because nobody's figured it out. Nobody's done this. Nobody's done this. Okay, you're doing it. But the thing that I think is so powerful is because you have a historical perspective about where we've been. You have the benefit of technology to show you where we can go rapidly. It's not going to take 100 years to do this because of technology and communication flow. But do you have any closing remarks before we sign off?
Sure. I want to lift up those, especially Black women, who have been so pivotal in the development of the Black economy. I especially think about Maggie Lena Walker, uh,
Yes.
but I also think about Dr. Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, who was the first Black woman to get a doctorate in economics, which
Whew.
she earned from the University of Pennsylvania in 1921. And also my mentor, and you knew her as well, Dr.
Yes.
Phyllis Ann Wallace, who was the first Black woman to get a doctorate in economics from Yale University in 1947, I believe. To lift up those women and to say to those who are watching, don't count us out. As they said when the HBCUs were first founded, tell them we are rising. The
Yes.
African American community cannot be marginalized. This country could not have been created without us, and right now cannot survive without us. We in the African American community have a lot of work to do, but guess what? We're equal to the task.
Oh,
And so I
yes.
hope that when you look at our history, you must be emboldened and strengthened by the history that caused Elizabeth Keckley to purchase herself,
Yes.
Magdalena Walker to start a bank. Who was this woman who started a bank? I mean, it was so amazing that she did that. Um, but she had the strength of character and just an enormous will to make a difference in our community. And so I would say to everyone who's listening and watching, make a difference in the community. Understand that we built a lot and a lot was taken, but they have not ever taken our spirit, our energy,
No,
our
they
strength.
haven't. No, they haven't. We come from a rich, rich history of struggle and survival. Dr.
Yep.
Malveaux, our time is up. And I want to thank you and all of you that are privileged to hear her. I told you it goes like, shoom. I want to thank you for consenting to come on to be my guest. I want to thank you for your wisdom and your perspective on where the African American is going and where Black money has got to go if we're going to get through these days ahead. And I send you warm wishes for your continued success, and I send you great blessings from the King of the universe. And on that note, we're closing out today's segment of The Power of Money with my guest, Dr. Julianne Malveaux.
Well,
Thank you
thank
all
you.
for viewing in. Have a great day. God bless. Bye-bye.